On May 13th, Air Force One touched down in Beijing, marking the first American presidential visit to China in nearly a decade. The entire globe is tracking the movements of this summit. The official public itinerary focuses on artificial intelligence, Taiwan, and trade. To execute this, the president arrived with a delegation including the CEO of NVIDIA, Elon Musk, and the secretaries of State and Defense. President Xi Jinping provided a high-profile diplomatic reception, dispatching his vice president to the airport and hosting an elaborate state banquet. Behind that warmth, however, Xi warned that mishandling Taiwan puts the entire relationship in jeopardy. These public exchanges obscure the most urgent issue on the table. The active war involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, which began in 2025, is what actually forced this meeting to happen. This map shows the Strait of Hormuz, where Washington cannot force peace alone. Beijing's massive energy purchases give China exclusive leverage to enforce a settlement. Iran is the true center of gravity. Every Muslim-majority nation relying on oil revenue is monitoring the Strait of Hormuz. A shutdown there would lead to immediate fiscal instability for governments across the Middle East and Southeast Asia. That instability affects individual households rapidly. The resulting energy crisis inflates the cost of basic necessities, placing a heavy burden on families. These negotiations will directly shape the physical survival and economic security of hundreds of millions of people. This includes Muslim Americans, many of whom have direct family and community connections to the regions at risk. This chart visualizes the Thucydides Trap, a historical pattern where a rising power threatens to displace an established one. Xi Jinping explicitly invoked this logic to warn against a direct conflict between China and the United States. The American delegation signals that this is a fused military and business negotiation. By bringing Elon Musk alongside his Secretary of State and Defense Secretary, the president is linking national security to corporate interests. The presence of NVIDIA's CEO highlights that the competition over advanced semiconductors and artificial intelligence remains a primary battlefield for these two superpowers. While Xi issued verbal warnings about Taiwan, the Chinese military sent a message of restraint on the ground. During the visit, Chinese warplanes completely halted their routine incursions near the island's airspace. Concrete trade-offs are on the table. China is expected to place massive orders for American aircraft and agricultural products like soybeans in exchange for an extension of the current trade truce. A direct conflict over these tech and trade issues would devastate the global economy. Muslim-majority nations, which rely on these stable trade routes for growth, would be among the hardest hit by a superpower collision. Surah Al-Anfal, verse 60, emphasizes the necessity of maintaining strength and strategic awareness. Historically, Muslim nations have faced their greatest challenges when they were absent from the rooms where global decisions were made. Today, China is the largest trading partner for most of the Muslim world. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, it has invested billions in infrastructure across the Gulf, Pakistan, and Central Asia. This economic partnership exists alongside the mass detention and surveillance of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang.
Credible reports document a systematic campaign of cultural suppression affecting millions of believers within China's borders. The Uyghur crisis was not on the official agenda in Beijing. The American administration chose to prioritize trade and the Iran ceasefire over raising human rights concerns for a distant Muslim minority. The Prophet Muhammad taught that witnessing a wrong requires a response, whether through action or speech. This creates a moral obligation for the global community to keep these issues visible, even when governments choose silence. This is the central paradox of the summit. The superpower acting as a vital economic lifeline for Muslim-majority nations is the same government actively detaining millions of Muslims. The timing of this entire summit was dictated by the volatility of the Iran war. The president delayed his travel until the current ceasefire provided a window for negotiation. Because the U.S. has severed its own diplomatic ties with Tehran, China remains the only major power with the financial leverage to force a permanent settlement to the conflict. The lives of millions across the Middle East now depend on whether Xi Jinping is willing to use his economic relationship with Iran to secure a real settlement. Major Muslim nations are increasingly refusing to choose sides. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Indonesia now maintain robust, simultaneous relationships with both Washington and Beijing. This balancing act moves away from the automatic alignment with Western policy seen in previous decades. Leaders in these nations now treat the two superpowers as competing partners rather than permanent allies. For Muslim Americans, ignoring these shifts in foreign policy creates a strategic blind spot. Decisions made in these rooms eventually affect domestic economic stability and the safety of families abroad.
True informed citizenship requires accepting that American government interests and the interests of Muslim communities will not always be aligned. Understanding where they diverge is a necessary part of advocacy. The leaders strolled through the pristine verdants of Zhongnanhai, admiring roses in a heavily choreographed display of diplomatic warmth. That sanitized image stands in contrast to the consequences these talks trigger in cities like Lagos and Karachi. While billionaires negotiate trade, families in Tehran and Detroit wait to see if their basic costs will stabilize. The Quran warns in Surah Al-Imran against placing naive trust in alliances with those whose interests do not align with your own. It teaches that such partnerships are tools, not friendships. While trade deals and tech agreements provide economic value, they do not resolve the human rights crisis or the ongoing war. Without a concrete ceasefire, the ceremonial aspects of this summit fail to address the primary threats to human life. The global Muslim community consists of 1.8 billion strategic agents who actively shape the energy economy, global trade routes, and diplomatic outcomes across the Eastern and Western hemispheres. Beyond the cold calculations of global superpowers, individual lives remain the most important part of any map or negotiation. A new generation of informed observers is moving past traditional stereotypes to deeply analyze how global power is actually being used. Navigating our fractured multipolar future requires clear-eyed understanding of these perspectives. This is why we examine the world through the lens of faith and history.